Well, hello once more, and a very warm welcome back to all my loyal YouTube subscribers, and thanks for returning to Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now in this next video we are going to take a look at another open class evolution bike and a machine that many riders still consider one of the best motocross bikes Honda ever made. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into the video and check out Archie Baird's 1983 480 Honda Evolution bike. Now when Honda launched the 480R in 1983, it was without doubt a race winner straight from the crate. But it was reasonably light, it handled superbly, and it certainly had the looks, and was about the quickest 500 that you could buy in 1983. But of course these 480s for outright top end speed maybe certainly weren't the quickest, and maybe not as fast as say a 490 Yamaha, but it did have a fantastically smooth motor and it could turn on a dime. Although nevertheless this was a bike for the big boys to ride, so if you were just a club rider in 1983 then this maybe wasn't the bike for you, but if you liked sharp handling and a powerful motor then this surely was the bike to buy in 1983. But our particular 480 Honda belongs to Scottish rider Archie Baird, and although Archie's machine's not maybe a fully original bike from that year, it's still a cracking example of one of these superb evolution Hondas. But as you know, the heart of these 83 480 Hondas is this fantastic two-stroke motor that had a 5-speed gearbox and absolutely bucket loads of mid-range power. Although the top end wasn't as good, but it certainly had the grunt where it was needed at the bottom to mid-range. Now these engines also had a very strong clutch on this bike, and it had to be to handle the many horses that this 480 motor was sending through it. Although riders of these 480s do say that because the power was concentrated in the mid-range, short shifting was certainly the way to get the best from this very quick two-stroke engine. But it was very powerful and very reliable. Now Archie's bike is fed its fuel through this Kian flat slide carburetor and V-Force 6-pedal reed valve block, but the power generated from this two-stroke motor was just astounding, and when the Honda's engine was in its sweet spot, the gas certainly flowed through it at an alarming rate through this Kian Carbs Venturi. And when you snapped that throttle back, this bike would take you exactly where you were going in a very big hurry. But it took a very special rider to tame one of these 480 Hondas, and you had to be at the top of your game to get the best from this open class two-stroke motor. But of course for the likes of Danny Magoo Chandler it really wasn't a problem, and Danny was just one of the few people who could ride these bikes to their limit. But without doubt these 480 two-stroke motors were superbly quick and certainly not short of the old horsepower. But the front forks on these 480s were usually 43mm Showas, and were good enough for an average rider, but if you were a Danny Magoo Chandler wannabe then these were maybe just far too soft and would need stiffening up, although they still gave the rider about 12 inches of travel to play with. Although the front and rear brakes were still the older drum affairs, which was quite strange for 1983, as a few manufacturers had already started using hydraulic disc brakes on their machines by this time. Now a single rear shock of course on these 480s, which worked quite well and would again originally have been a Showa unit, although Archie's bike has had a little upgrade and fitted this top of the range Öhlins unit. Now this in turn was of course bolted onto Honda's ProLink suspension linkage, which is still regarded as one of the best motocross suspension systems of its day. And again, this was also very strong and worked superbly well. Now Archie's exhaust system, as you'd expect, is not the Honda original, but a much better, higher quality part made by those guys at D&G Exhaust Systems. Now this again has been bolted on to this very light alloy tailpipe, and once again also manufactured by D&G. Now naturally a very strong beefed up alloy box section swing arm on these 480s, and while it was connected to the excellent Honda ProLink suspension, it gave very good feedback to the rider and had very little in the way of flexing. Now again, more magnesium on this rear brake backplate, and as I remember, the castings that the brake shoes were attached to were also made of magnesium on these bikes, which of course were very light parts and were obviously used to try and keep the bike's weight down, although this was still a very light bike for a big 480 at only 226 pounds, and at the time the all-up weight of the bike still weighed less than some 250s of that same year. But one of the other innovations for the 83 was that Honda carried the front section of the bike seat onto the rear of the tank, and they nicknamed this the Lazy Boy because of the comfort it gave the rider, and believe me, you certainly needed it when this bike started kicking up its heels over rough tracks. Although this type of seat layout is now of course being continued on modern motocross machines even here in 2020. Now this CNC alloy ignition cover is of course not a Honda part, but this part is actually made by Archie in his machine shop, and the L&B reference is for Loudon and Baird, who manufacture them. Now on the bike's handlebars, a nice pair of Rikon control levers on Archie's 480. Now these are very top quality and certainly don't break easily and work well on these rental handlebars and grips. But of course you have to have these top quality controls to handle the power from that 480 motor. But these reed valve 480 engines never had such modern parts as a power valve in the cylinder, but nevertheless it still had enough grunt to pull your arms out of the sockets and wouldn't think twice about throwing you off the back if you weren't prepared when you snapped that throttle back. And even just looking at this engine standing still, you can see that it just oozes attitude. But when it came to firing up one of these 480s, they weren't the easiest bikes to get going, as riders used to comment about the kickstarts being set too high and quite awkwardly placed. So if you were a bit vertically challenged and had short legs, then this could be a bit of a chore. But then of course if you didn't get it right, there was also the dreaded kickback, which if you didn't do damage to your person, you could quite easily break a kickstart knuckle on the lever. But nevertheless, despite these little misdemeanors, this was still a serious bit of kit, and if you were a full-on balls to the wall motocross junkie, then this was definitely the bike for you. And if you were lucky enough to witness the great Danny Magoo Chandler racing one of these bikes back in the day, then you'll know exactly what I mean. But for sure, these 480 CRs are certainly up there with some of the best dirt bikes that Honda ever produced, and as I mentioned earlier, they weren't the fastest in 1983 because if the track was a top gear full throttle layout, then it might struggle a little, but if the course was tight and twisty, then this bike with its superb chassis and stonking motor would certainly outturn and outrun anything on the track. And this particular picture is of the bike's owner, Archie Baird, enjoying the power and handling of that 480 at a motocross race event in 2017. So there it is. I hope you've enjoyed this brief look around another iconic machine from back in the day on 1983 480 Honda. Now don't forget, if you'd like to see more of these long lost classics, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Okay, next up we'll be taking a look at some very nice British built Greaves motorcycles, so I do hope you'll tune in to see those. So thanks very much again for taking the time to watch my videos, and I do hope you return soon to view more old motocross machines right here on Classic Dirt Bike TV.